Parshas Emor discusses Firas HaOmer. I'd like to dedicate this shir as a schus for Refuah Shalema to those who've been injured in the terrible tragedy in Meron, this Lag BaOmer, as well as L'zecher Nishmas, those who passed away. May their memories be a blessing. The Torah discusses in Perek Chaf Gimel, chapter 23, Pasuk Tesvav, verses 15 and 16. The Torah says, "Usvaytem lachem mimachras hashabos miyoma haviachem esomer hatnufa sheva shabosos timimos tiena." You shall count from the day after the Sabbath, from the day you bring the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Shabbosos, Sabbaths or weeks, shall be completed. So first of all, what's the Shabbos? It says that you should start counting mimachras hashabos. There's a lot of discussion about this, actually some controversy about what exactly the day after the Shabbos means. It does not mean Shabbos with a capital S, as we would refer to it as the seventh, the recurring cycle of the seventh day of the week, but rather it means the first day of the Chag. Why is it called Shabbos? Because that is a day on which there is shvisa of malacha. There is desisting from conducting creative activity. So, and the Yom Tov has Cholo Shel Moed, has days on which there is not the same level. There's some level of prohibition of work, but not the same as on the first day. The first day is total desisting except for Ochel Nefesh. But nevertheless, all other malachos, all other types of creative activity of the sort that are prohibited on a Shabbos are also prohibited on the first day of Yom Tov. In Chutz, we have the first 2 days of Yom Tov. So you count on the day after the first day of Pesach, which is the second day, but it doesn't say the second day. It says Miyom Haviachem Es Omer Hatnufa, from the day that you bring the Omer offering. And what do you count? So it says Ad Mimocharas Hashabos Hashavi'is. This is now Pasuk Tezayin, which is verse 16, until the day after the 7th Shabbos, meaning the 7th week. Tisbru Chamishim Yom. You count a total of 50 days. V'kraftem mincha chadasha l'Hashem. You shall offer a new meal offering to God. So, is there an obligation to count Sfira nowadays? Well, you'll say yes, because we do. We even say a bracha. But the question is, or a question is this obligation mida oraisa? Is it the biblical obligation that we just read, or is it a different level of obligation? Is it, for example, mida rabbanon? Is it a rabbinic obligation? Well, you'll say, but it says in the verse, it says, Usfartem lochem mimachras hashabos, you should count. Yes, but it also says, Miyom aviachem esomer tnufa, when you bring the korban ha'omer, the omer offering, that's only brought in the Beis Hamikdash. We do not, unfortunately, have a Beis Hamikdash. May it be rebuilt speedily in our days. And actually, that is the harachman that we say, this mini prayer that we say after we count the omer. We say, harachman yachzir lanu avodas Beis Hamikdash limkoma. The Almighty should return the service of the Beis Hamikdash to its rightful place. So we acknowledge that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and consequently, we don't have the Omer offering. So is this a condition to the counting of the Omer? Meaning, if you have a Korban HaOmer, then you count. And if you don't count. Well, you'll say, but we know that we count. Yes, that's true. But is that because of the verse, that it's a biblical mandate? Or is it a Zecher L'Mikdash? Is it a commemoration of what happened in the Beis HaMikdash? And that is because, meaning it's not Midoraisa, because we don't bring the Korban Omer. So there's machlokus about this, a difference among the authorities. Most poskim, notably Rashi, say that counting the Sfira Bizman Hazen nowadays is Midrabanon. It is, quote, only Derabanan. It's a rabbinical obligation, but it does not have the force of biblical law. There's some practical implications about this, which we will not go into right now. There's certain leniencies that one can adopt if a mitzvah is midrabanan as opposed to midoraisa. So it has practical applications, but we're going to focus on the difference of opinion. Now the Rambam says it's midoraisa. Now how do we know this? Well, the Rambam says in Hilchos Tamidin Umusafin, in his Yarach HaZakah, in the 7th chapter and the 22nd halach, he says, "Mitzvahs aseh lispor sheva shabasos timimos." There is an affirmative obligation, biblical obligation, to count 7 complete weeks. from the day of the beginning of Emor, and he quotes the verse, and he says, he describes how to count, and then 2 halachos later, he says, mitzvah zo, this mitzvah, al kol ish mi Yisrael, and every man of Israel. It's a mitzvah seishas man gram, I'm adding parenthetically. It is a time-triggered mitzvah, so therefore women are fundamentally exempt, although it is the practice that women count. Mitzvah zo al kol ish mi Yisrael, ubechol makom, ubechol zman. Every place, every time, at all times. So we see that it is not, according to the Rambam, dependent on whether there is a Beis HaMikdash or not. He says mitzvah saseh, which is Rambam's formulation for saying it's an affirmative biblical obligation. So how could that be? One would think that the triggering event for the Korban Omer is the bringing of the Omer offering. So the Aruch Hashulchan cites an Agadic passage that relates to a verse in the Torah. In the Torah it says, this is going back to Moshe's first encounter with the Almighty at the burning bush. And he says, this is now in Shemos, Gimel, Yud, Beis, 3:12. Vayomer kiyeya imach. This is in the course of the dialogue between the Almighty and Moshe. And he says, V'zelecha os, ki anochi shlachticha. And here's a sign that you're going to know that I sent you. You will serve God on this mountain. And that's an allusion to the revelation, to receiving the Torah on that mountain. And according to the Medrash, according to the Agoda, when Moshe Rabbeinu told this over to the Jews, they said, when's this going to be? As they were leaving Egypt. They said, you said we're going to serve God. And he says, in 50 days, we're going to serve God on that mountain. And the Aruch Hashulchan says that based on that Medrash, that the Rambam maintains that Sfiras HaOmer is the counting towards Kabbalas HaTorah. Now we know this, but what he says is that that's the fundamental essence of the counting of Sfira, is in anticipation of the receiving of the Torah. So this seems to contradict the verse that says, Miyom Aviyachem es Omer Tuva, from the day that you bring the Omer. And the Aruch Hashulchan says, no. It's not that we count from the bringing of the Omer, but rather we bring the Omer to signify the kickoff of the counting. And the counting ends at Shavuos, and there's another korban, there's another grain offering to signify the conclusion of the count. And that is the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread that are brought on Shavuos. And why are those significant? So the Aruch Hashulchan observes that the korban ha'omer is brought from sa'orim, from barley. The shtei halechem on Shavuos are brought from chitin, from wheat. What's the difference between the two? Among the differences, besides the physical difference, is that classically, barley, although I enjoy it in the cholent that my wife makes, barley is considered by Chazal, by the rabbis, as principally meichel behema. It's something that, it's animal food. And chitin, wheat products, are considered meichel adam, are considered to be human fit, most fit for human consumption. So why is that significant? And the Aruch Hashulchan says, we know from the korban sota, a woman who's suspected of having committed adultery in certain circumstances, that the offering that she brings is a minchas sa'orim. It's brought of barley. Why? Because when somebody acts in an unrestrained way and simply follows their passions, that is animal-like. So the offering that's brought to mark someone's having transgressed by following their animal-like passions is an offering that's made of food fit for an animal. So what we represent by starting the count with barley and ending the count with a wheat product at the conclusion of Shavuos, where we commemorate the receiving of the Torah, is to say, you know what, without the Torah, there's not much that distinguishes us from the animals. We fulfill our human potential to the utmost only through the Torah. And it is for this reason that we count towards the Torah. The physical freedom of Egypt is only a first step. It's not an end in itself. The end is to be free so that we can study the Torah, we can receive the Torah, we can study the Torah, we can master the Torah, we can live by the Torah, and we can learn to love the Torah. Have a good Shabbos.